My name is Anne Butler. I am a member of the Mi'kmaq community here. My mother's from Seal Rocks, which is about 100 kilometers south of Corner Brook and is one of the Bay St. George Mi'kmaq communities. I've been here at Grenfell campus for about 3 years, and I have several different roles that I play. One of them is as the Aboriginal Affairs Officer, which is my full-time job, but I also have an appointment as an adjunct professor in humanities. And I teach courses every now and then. Last fall, I taught a course, Indigenous Humanities course, called Contemporary Indigenous Ideas, Personal Narrative. And that course was all kinds of different creative ways of getting different types of people involved, different content in the curriculum, and and that's the basic explanation of the course. Sure. So the course came about as a kind of an idea around how to shift the way that we teach humanities, for one thing, the idea came to me. I was already going to be teaching a course with the broad heading of contemporary Indigenous ideas. But when I got into exactly what I wanted to do, I was reading an edited collection by Marie Batiste, Envisioning a Mi'kmaq Humanities, and I think the subtitle is Indigenizing the Academy. And I thought, like, that's exactly how I want to do this, is to talk about Indigenous humanities through the course. But when I do things, I try to do things that, I don't want to just teach this one course to this one specific audience. How can I make that experience broader for everyone involved? So the course had different aspects to it. One was that it was Indigenous humanities. The other was that the student groups were varied. So we had the typical student here at Grenfell, the undergraduate student who's between 18 and 24 or whatever. But then we opened it up. So people from the community participated in the course, and we had people from age 18 up to, one of our students was 71 years old. And there were 3 levels of registration. And that was an idea that was copied from a couple of years ago, where at Cape Breton University, they offered a course with Stephen Augustine and Ashley Consolo, who's now with Memorial University, where they had 3 levels of registration. And I think a lot of universities are doing that now. So you could register for university credit, just like a regular university student, for academic credit. You could register for a community participation certificate, which would be a non-academic certificate that you participated in the course. Or you could pay nothing and just do it for personal enrichment. Just sit in on the discussions, participate in the course. And so that was one way of opening it up. The other way was that I spoke with the community of Flat Bay, which is a Mi'kmaq community that is kind of adjacent to where my mom grew up, in Bay St. George, and they came on board as a community partner classroom. So they had a room set up in their band office that had technology equipment where they could do video back and forth. And then the Labrador Institute in Goose Bay, which is part of Memorial University, also has a classroom that is set up that way. So they were another classroom. In the end, in Labrador, I only had one student register, so she ended up using her own computer. But it was set up so that a group of people could gather in Flat Bay and be on this live video stream with students upstairs here at Grenfell campus. And then I actually moved around. So I would teach from Grenfell campus 1 week. And everyone else who was connected would be watching me on video, live video. And then I would go to Flat Bay, teach there. I went to Labrador once during the term and taught from that classroom with the one student from Labrador. But in addition to those clusters, then we used the Blue Jeans platform. So anyone from their home could just connect from their own computer. In addition to that, we also saved the recordings so that if you were unable to participate live, you could watch it after the fact. So we had a little YouTube channel that was private, that was only accessible by the people in the course, and then they could watch it afterwards if they wanted to. So we had different people participating in the course, as well as different ways that you could connect to the course. And really for me it was about getting more Indigenous people involved in the course. And so the community of Flat Bay, which is an Indigenous community, had those members participating from there, so that the students here at Grenfell, so some of them in the course were Indigenous and some of them were not, but they were getting this experience with different ages of people and different backgrounds. And then the content of the course was strictly Indigenous. So every single thing that we read was written by an Indigenous person. And then kept on bringing it back to the introductory chapter of Marie Baptiste's book about what is Indigenous Humanities. And we use personal narratives. So every single thing in the course was autobiographies by Indigenous people. And then the questions kept on coming back to the same thing. How does this help inform Indigenous humanities, and what is the value of personal narrative to the study of history? And it went really well, I think, yeah. But we did talk about the importance of language to culture, and there was well, in Marie Baptiste's chapter, but also in another chapter in the same book that we did go through, was Sagej Henderson had a chapter where he talks about some of the different words that are used in the Mi'kmaq language that get misunderstood when we're translating them into English. And one of them I remember was, well, we use it all the time in Mi'kmaq is Sid Nogama, all my relations. But when he talked about it, he talked about it in a longer form of everything is alive and is my relation, and that just makes it more, I don't know, there's more meaning in that. But we went through those sorts of things, but also one of the sections that we did in terms of personal narrative wasn't exactly autobiography, but it was music and lyrics. And so I had different groups. So one was a hip hop artist from Guatemala who is Cachiquel Maya. Then there was I'm not going to remember them all, but there were different Indigenous peoples from the Americas, different places in the Americas, and their music and their lyrics. So I had, with the hip hop artist from Guatemala, I was lucky because I happened to know him personally, and so he did translations for me from Cachiquel into Spanish, and then I was able to do the translation from Spanish into English, knowing that I'm losing meaning in all of that somewhere. But for students to be able to, he has a music video of one of his songs, so they were able to view the video and then see his language, see the Spanish, and then read the English as well. So language fit into it, but not in a really big way. But certainly culture, because all of these narratives were autobiographies of Indigenous people, and there were so many common themes that went across all of the different works that, it was definitely, culture was a big part of the course. I feel like we all made a really good connection with one another, and I had a couple of the students who are the traditional age student, the 18 to 24 or whatever. A couple of them came to my office and said that they were really they got a lot out of having the older people in the course. And that was something I wasn't sure would happen, because I thought, I don't know, if you have 65 and 70-year-old people in a course with 18 to 20-year-olds, I wasn't really sure if the 18 to 20-year-olds would appreciate that as much as I was hoping that they would. They did, according to them anyway. And also one thing about the course was that there were 2 sets of father-daughter duos that took the course together, which I thought was pretty neat. So for me, one of the big things that came out of it is that I had maybe 6 people register for the course for academic credit who were not previously university students, who were like in their late 30s, in their 40s, or some who had graduated years ago and weren't planning on going back to university, who now want to pursue the certificate in Aboriginal and Indigenous Studies through this university. Excuse me. So I'm happy about that, because it kind of some of them are people who have a whole lot of traditional knowledge. They're people that I go to for advice, and that they're interested in kind of looking at it from another point of view as well, but also focused in Indigenous knowledge, I think is pretty cool. Now, if we can get that to sort of weave more through the university, that would be great. I mean, we're only talking about one course. One of the things that I'm doing with this course is doing a really lengthy survey of the students, so that they can give more feedback. I mean, anytime you teach a course, you have these little feedback forms, and they're not really, I'm not sure what they measure. Let's just say that. But I have a lengthy survey that I've put together for all the students where there's a lot of open-ended questions where they can just go on their own and not be rating something from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 or whatever, and find out, excuse me, find out not just about the content and the issues around, how successful was the course or how much did they take from it, but also technological challenges to find out if we do it again, which I'm planning to do, what are some ways that we might change? Was it easy for you to log on? Was it a pain in the neck? How would you prefer to have more of these community partner classrooms and cluster in different rooms? Or do you want to do it from your living room? Those kinds of things. So that, for me, that's a measure in terms of getting the actual feedback from the students in a meaningful way. And the other part is, if the ones that took it just as a one-off course, if they then want to take other courses, then I guess for me that would mean some success for it. At the end of the course, there was a take-home exam for the people who were taking it for credit. And one of the questions, it was an essay, 2 essays. So they had 2 sections, and then they could pick, one section had a specific question I wanted them to answer, and the other section had 3 or 4 questions. They could choose one. And then they had that in advance, and then they wrote it at home and they submitted it. But then the people who took the course for the community participation certificate, they wrote just the first essay, and basically it was a self-reflection and how did you engage with this course? What did you learn from this course? And in those essays, I was really blown away with how open people were, and how they openly acknowledged that they had to challenge some of their preconceived notions of what is the history of the province, what is the history of Canada, some of the stereotypes that they had believed without question, and then after reading autobiography after autobiography and seeing the same themes come up, reevaluating what they thought. So that was, I think, an impact that students, that shifted the minds of some of the students anyway. I mean, some of them came into the course already having a lot of knowledge, and that wasn't a surprise to them. But for those that were willing to acknowledge that, I thought that was really great. A lot of people think Indigenous education means teaching Indigenous studies to people. But to me, Indigenous education is teaching in a way that is from Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the world. So, so when I go in a classroom where you have a podium at the front or big desk at the front, and then you have these rows of seats that are facing the instructor, I can't, like, for me, that I can't even, I've been teaching for a long time, and that is still horrifyingly uncomfortable for me, because that isn't the way that's not, certainly it's not Indigenous education, but it's certainly not, for me, it's not a way that people learn well. That's just a really tiny example, but all of the, like, Indigenous education would be stripping down everything that's in the institution that we think, that we've been told in all of our education is the right way to learn and teach, stripping that all away and going back to community ways, I guess, Indigenous community ways of teaching and learning. And that would mean you wouldn't have these rows of desks, you would have circles and gatherings, and a more instead of talking it would be a dialogue among people, and that's the way that I try to teach within this system. But yeah, Indigenous education would be a different way of teaching. It wouldn't necessarily be teaching Indigenous histories, although that would be also part of it. So Indigenous education also includes decolonizing the information that we're using in the curriculum that we are all sort of passing along inadvertently because we don't realize how embedded it is in everything that we do. So it's stripping away the colonial narrative, but it's stripping away the structures, the physical spaces, and everything that pretty much everything, and starting over. Because I'm in post-secondary, I'd like to see, in 10 years, I'd like to see elders on campus that are receiving salaries that match with fully tenured professors. I'd like to see an opening up and an understanding of traditional knowledge on a par, so that you could have people teaching various courses who maybe they don't have a PhD in a very particular subject, but they have traditional knowledge that they can share with students. And for the university, I don't mean just this university, for every university to actually value that the same way that the academic credentials are valued. And I'd like to see a faculty complement that matches with the percentage of the population. So if you have here at Grenfell campus, between 25 and 26% of our students are Indigenous. And you'd be hard pressed to find an Indigenous faculty member that has a actual tenure track position. I'm Indigenous. I have an adjunct, which is that's not an actual, it's a non-stipendary, an appointment where I can teach as a per course instructor, and it's great. I love it. But we don't have, I think we might have one or two other people who, one is a teaching term and the other one is actually tenure track. But out of however many faculty we have, we definitely don't have 25% of our faculty self-identifying as Indigenous people. So that would be another, in 10 years, it should match the population, at least, I'd say. Yeah. Reviewing what is required for tenure. So when you go up for tenure, there's this list of things that you need to have published, this or this, and da-da-da-da. But people who are doing amazing things within Indigenous communities, maybe their accomplishments don't line up exactly with this list of things you want to check off. So opening that up, and the only way to do that is to have more Indigenous people on all these different committees that make all these decisions. So that's where, if you increase the number of Indigenous faculty and then they all end up sitting on these different committees, that's where you get a shift. Because right now in many institutions, there's a person like me who is in charge of or responsible for Aboriginal affairs or Aboriginal supports, and then there might be one or two other people depending on the university. Maybe at a really big one, we might have 5 people, but we're not embedded in the hierarchy of the institution. And so really what ends up happening is that we're always knocking on someone's door and saying, what about this and what about that? But if you get the Indigenous people in the actual room where all these decisions are being made, then those people, and it's not one person at the table raising their hand and being the oddball every time you have a question. If you had 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 people at that table who are Indigenous, and I'm not implying that all Indigenous people have the same ideas, but that you would have those voices at the table, and then when you come up with a decision, you might end up with a more creative way of operating your institution for the betterment of everyone. Well, obviously money is a big one, but that's for everything there's money, because even if you had money, it doesn't do anything if you don't have a mindset shift. So you need a mindset shift. I think the way that happens is you just slowly amass different numbers of people, and eventually you have a critical mass that can pressure more and effect more change, and eventually embed into all the different levels of governance in the institution, but we're not anywhere close to that. But it does require a mindset shift, and that's I think the hardest part. You can assign all kinds of funds. You can have one or two people at the top who really, really champion something and put aside funds for it. But if you don't get the mindset shift, it isn't going to be effective. So that's the biggest thing. And I think that, I'm sitting here talking about post-secondary because this is where I work. But until we're starting in kindergarten, it's an uphill battle, a losing battle. Because once someone's an adult and comes to university, it is now you're trying to chip away at stuff that they've held as, the gospel truth their whole lives, and it's really difficult. So then, now you're like undoing stuff that that they've learned over the years. So it has to start in kindergarten. Yeah. So that would be a conversation for someone else, I guess. But I think universities can play a role in that because they can begin to pressure. Pressure is the wrong word. I begin to encourage the school districts to make shifts in the curriculum.